But I want to thank everyone for coming tonight and hopping on virtually with us. We are recording, as you just heard, and so hopefully the link to this video will be up tomorrow or the next day, and I'll also email that out as soon as Metro sends me that link. So tonight, as we've discussed previously, we're going to be going over kind of land use policy and zoning and what that means in the Harding corridor. And we're going to be using Belle Meade Plaza as examples throughout this because that is what one of the current proposals on the table. As you know, St. Thomas has an SP that passed several years ago and was approved. And that has been in discussion of what they are going to do next with that, along with some property owned by Hill Realty in front of them. That is under the Hardingtown UDO, which we're not going to get into a whole lot tonight because the Belle Meade Plaza is not in the Hardingtown UDO. But I will make sure that a link to that is included in my email. I think it's been in a past email, but I'll make sure that it's in the next ones. So tonight, I really appreciate planning staff putting this presentation together. Some of y'all may have attended in the past that I have done zoning 101s, kind of to just go over what is zoning, how does it impact your property, what are the different options. We've done that several times over the last couple of years, and it's probably been about a year since we've done that. And so this is kind of a condensed version and site-specific, area-specific version of that. And so just to remind y'all, tonight is just really to talk about the information of the zoning and land use. And then if you have questions, you can put them in the chat to me. And as we get to the end, we can go through them as time allows. I wanted to remind you that we do have our next actual community meeting about Belle Meade Plaza. That's going to be in February, on February 15th. I'm still finalizing the location for that. And at that meeting, the development team will be presenting their updates and revisions based on community feedback through the course of the past meetings and emails and comments sent in. So with that, I will turn it over to Anita from the planning department. And then also we'll hear from Lisa as well. And if y'all, when the first time you speak, if you'll just introduce yourself and your roles.
Thank you, Councilmember Murphy. I'm Anita McKeag with the Planning Department, and I work in the Long Range Planning Division, Community Plans. So when folks talk about Nashville Next, community plans, land use policy, that's my world. And so as Councilmember Murphy mentioned, we're going to get started here with some things. And of course, suddenly it's like, oh, my presentation won't, there we go. I was going to say it won't switch slides. So just a little bit about the Planning Commission and the Planning Department, because the council member asked us to start off general with who we are and what we do. So, you know, we report to the Planning Commissioners, 10 members, and they're mostly appointed, but there's one council representative, which is the chair of Planning and Zoning Committee. And Councilmember Murphy, you've had that in the past. You've held that role in the past. Others are appointed by the mayor and guided by rules and procedures. They usually meet twice a month, except for holidays. And so the function, one of the main roles of the commission, they're required to adopt a general plan. As the staff, we make recommendations to them on various things for review and approval. The planning commissioners decide things, land use policy changes, plan amendments, plan updates. So when you talk about Nashville Next and community plans, that's the planning commissioners making that decision. And then they also make decisions about subdivisions. And then with rezonings, they serve an advisory role for the council. And other things you'll see the Planning Commission working on, changing the zoning ordinance text and approving the capital improvements budget. So then when you move to the roles of planning staff as the department, We're always working with communities to create the appropriate policies, transportation priorities, open space priorities. We do that through Nashville Next and the community plans. We provide design services. We consult on green network planning, multi-mobility planning. We also work with the land development team as far as making recommendations in the previous slide to the Planning Commission. So a little bit then about Nashville Next, which is the general plan. So every city has a comprehensive plan. That's that long range vision. What do you as a city want to be in the next 20 or 25 years? What do you want to do? The last plan we had, comprehensive plan, was Concept 2010. And this one, Nashville Next, we worked on it for 3 years and it was adopted by the Planning Commission in 2015. And it absorbed a lot of things, you know, the history of all those other plans we'd worked on, the 14 community plans that have been around since the 1990s, the other departments' documents like In Motion from WeGo and Walk and Bike and Plan to Play from Parks and Greenways. And so it's always good to remind everyone that Nashville Next came from the people of Nashville. Thousands and thousands of ideas and various topics were put together and discussed over that 3-year period. The guiding principles are really important too, because it's things that are reiterated all the time. Be Nashville, you know, maintain the city's uniqueness, the unique character and what makes us friendly and welcoming, foster our strong neighborhoods, make things more accessible, create economic prosperity for everyone, champion the environment, preserve the natural features that make our city so lovely, advance education, and ensure opportunity for all. So equity is woven throughout. So it's always good. Here's the Nashville Next and all the pieces, but community plans works mainly with the community character manual and the zoning and subdivision decisions. So Nashville Next includes in making that vision translate to a map of the cities, of the vision for various areas and what we want to see. People had choices and they reiterated, hey, we've been focusing on growing existing centers and corridors since community plans first began in the 1990s. We would like to continue to do that. So you'll see the black lines with red, transition and infill areas accommodate a variety of housing. Those are around the centers and corridors. And then you see this large area of the green network, the rural areas that should be preserved, all the parks, the floodplains, and then the yellow are our established neighborhoods. So if you look at the Belle Meade Plaza as an example, I'm sure everyone's familiar with where we're at along Harding Pike and White Bridge Pike here at the intersection. So if you look at an example of what that growth and preservation concept map means for the Belle Meade Plaza area and the surrounding area, here's Belle Meade Plaza outlined in black here. So you see you see the darker orange red of the center area. That's what should be a complete center. When we think of complete centers, we think of areas that provide a variety of housing, jobs, recreation, places where people can come, gather, meet services, needs, worship. And then you'll see this kind of beige color around that, which is the transition and infill area. And that doesn't mean that everything around a center is transition and infill. That doesn't mean that necessarily these single family homes are going away. But in some areas, you can see how there is room to transition and infill around a center. You see the green network here with Richland Creek, and you see the yellow color of the neighborhoods. And then this blue line is working with WeGo on the high capacity transit corridors. And this was identified as an immediate need along Harding and White Bridge. So drilling down to how that applies to specific properties within an area, the concept plan is more general, as I said. So community plans, we utilize a concept called the transect. It's pretty easy to grasp because it moves from the most natural areas like Beeman Park, Bells Bend Park, Warner Parks, to rural areas like Jolton, Whites Creek, Bells Bend, the ridgetops of Bellevue, suburban areas, which is what a majority of the city is in, the suburban transect, you can see from the pink color. Urban the darker pink kind of mauve color here. You get to centers, more intense in the purple, and then of course downtown, the most intense in red. So things are organized around the characteristics of each one of those areas. So community plans divided into 14 areas across the city. As I mentioned, late 80s, 1990s were when the first community plans were created. They drill down to specific properties within those geographic areas and work with the community on creating that vision, incorporating that, translating that into land use policy. We mainly look to that when someone comes in and wants to change their property entitlement, so guide future zoning requests. And each community plan has been updated several times over the years. So this just kind of shows you that each document, when you look at these online, or if you have a paper copy that goes back, you can see that each one is organized around the same types of information that you see. And you can have supplemental policies that provide further guidance to what the land use policy is. You can have development scenarios that kind of show an example of how something can happen. Talk about what enhancements should make to the transportation and open space networks, as well as what role the community has in the larger picture. So we look to the policy dictionary, which is called the Community Character Manual, often shortened to CCM. And that goes back to things that the transect, it translates each one of those districts of the transect into specific policy guidance then. And it's what you look to, along with the community plan and the land use policy, you go to the heart of the CCM and look at what it says about how that policy category should be designed, what it's intended to do, how it transitions to surrounding areas, and how it fits within the larger picture. And it's always important to remind people, because it's easily confused as to what's the difference between land use policy and zoning. Policy is Nashville Next, the vision for an area, the community plans, its guidance. And zoning is the law and what a property is entitled to do. So here's an aerial again, just showing the area. And then here's the land use policy. And of course, for Belle Meade Plaza, you see the different colors here. This is T5, which is a center, regional center. And then you see, once again, the open space and green network of the Richland Creek area. You see the urban center policy of Lions Head, and then neighborhood evolving here, which is a range of housing types. And then, of course, the larger yellow suburban neighborhood maintenance area, which you see all around. So just showing an example of what is that transect category. This one is shown in brown here. So T5 Regional Center. So these are places, they're really large gathering places. You know, they're really serving as that complete community with that mix of uses, residential, commercial, office, civic, recreational. You should have a choice of transportation and how to get there, how to get around. It should have a very welcoming pedestrian environment. You usually find taller buildings with structured parking. And in T5 centers and downtown, you will see land being used to the highest extent, often vertical buildings rather than outwards, streets framed by buildings. And then when you drill down to the policy category that's part of that, it's regional center. And so once again, it's talking about how does regional center then implement the overall T5 center vision. You know, uses are drawn from a larger area, high lot coverage, building facades built up to the back edge of the sidewalk to create that pedestrian friendly environment. It engages pedestrians. You've got high level of connectivity with different modes of transportation, street trees, formal landscaping to create that welcoming environment, vertical mixed use buildings up to 15 stories in height, structured parking versus surface parking. And then Lisa's going to talk a little bit about the current zoning.
Lisa, if you're talking, I think you're on mute.
Hi, this is Lisa Milligan with the Metro Planning Department. I'm the manager of the Land Development Division. Sorry about that. I was having a little bit trouble getting myself unmuted. So I'm going to walk through, as Anita said, and Anita, I think you'll have to move the slides forward for me. I'm going to talk a little bit about the existing zoning that is in the area and what that means in regards to FAR. The current zoning on this property, and you can see all of the zonings represented by the different colors. The current zoning on the property is orange. It's mixed use limited. And then some surrounding zonings are CS, commercial service, OG, which is office general. We have OR 20, which is office residential across the street. There is some SP, which the council member mentioned is the St. Thomas SP. And then you'll see various lighter shades, which represent residential districts, including RS 40, which is single family, 40,000 square feet. R6, which is 1 and 2 family, 6,000 square feet minimum lot size. R10, which is 1 and 2 family, 10,000 square feet minimum lot size. And then you'll also see a satellite city there, which we actually don't zone within those satellite cities that are within the county. You can go to the next slide, please.
I am trying, Lisa, and it's not letting me again. There we go.
Okay, so mixed use limited zoning it allows for, like the name denotes, a mixture of uses. It allows for residential, single family, 2 family, multifamily. And the development on this property could be all residential. And so it's not required to be mixed use. It is just allowed to be mixed use. It also allows for office uses such as financial institutions or banks and general offices. It permits medical uses, various community uses, as well as commercial uses such as your retail sales, services, and hotels, motels, along with restaurants. It does require landscape buffers to certain surrounding uses, typically less intense uses such where there's a shared lot line, such as with residential zoning. The zoning is going to control the bulk regulations. And when we talk about bulk regulations, we're talking about things like setbacks, lot coverage, FAR, which is floor area ratio. And what that means is the amount of development that is allowed to be on the site. Anita, do you want to go to the next slide? Okay, so the current zoning on the property, like I mentioned, is MUL. The zoning on the property allows a 1 FAR. What that means is that the property is about 10.4 acres. And the zoning allows for a 1 FAR. So what that means is that with 10.4 acres, it's around 10.4. It would allow approximately 460,000 square feet of development. And so that would be total across the site. Now, one thing to keep in mind with zoning is that if you have structured parking, such as a parking garage, any parking that is provided to meet the requirements of the zoning code as it relates to parking do not count against the FAR. So in other words, you would be allowed to have, let's say, 460,000 square feet of usable space plus area for parking. And so the parking would not count against your floor square footage. MUL has what we call a height control plane. What that means is that at the setbacks of the property, the buildings are allowed to be a certain height. And then as you move away from the edges of that property, the building is allowed to get taller. So the further that you move away, the taller that a building is allowed to get. What's on the screen now is showing one potential of maxing out the FAR on the site. This has not been filed, this has not been proposed, and there are a lot of other iterations that are potential given the size and shape of the property. Buildings as proposed could be much taller than what's shown, or could spread out further across the site. So this is just simply showing one iteration, and this does not show the maximum square footage. What you're seeing is around 400,000 square feet of usable space, plus parking to meet the needs of that usable space. But like I said, the property is entitled right now for around 460,000 square feet. Okay, Anita.
And once again, for some reason, this presentation does not like the advancing slides. We just have it's another picture of this facing another direction, Lisa. Let me see if I can go out and come back in. Because we'll do it this way. Not as nice. But then we've got the map of the Harding Town Center UDO here.
Okay, so let me just talk about this slide for a moment. So as Councilmember Murphy mentioned, there is generally in this area a Harding Town Center urban design overlay, which is shown here covered in the orange. An urban design overlay is an overlay that is placed on top of properties. It doesn't undo the zoning. It's placed in addition to the zoning. Now, this overlay does not cover the Belle Meade Plaza property. As you can see, it covers primarily properties on the opposite side of White Bridge Pike and on both sides of Harding Pike. There were some triggers for the Harding Town Center urban design overlay that actually weren't met. And so a lot of the standards that are in there now are voluntary standards. But you can see here where the property, where it covers, and I think that Councilmember mentioned that she would send out a link to those documents, but those do not cover the Belle Meade Plaza property. With that, that's all that I had to present in regards to the existing zoning, and I'm going to pass it back over to Anita.
Councilmember, that's the information we have. So if you want to move to Q&A.
Yeah, that would be great. So if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat to me, and I will be going through and asking them and consolidating them together and things like that. So I have a few to start, and we'll probably just bounce back and forth between Lisa and Nita most likely. But since we just did the Harding Town UDO slide, let me start there. So you answered the question that it's now voluntary. Can you explain a little bit more about what voluntary means? Does it mean that like new development has to meet those standards, or can they just do whatever they want? And how does it apply, or does it apply to the St. Thomas SP? And for those of y'all that I spoke that jargon, which I try not to do, SP is a specific plan zoning. So kind of the I guess the, you know, Lisa, what's the best way to call it an SP zoning to describe that? It's kind of customized zoning. Oh, Lisa, you can't unmute. Hold on just a second. I'll find you.
Sure. So that I think anytime I mute myself, it's a problem to get back unmuted. But my dog often barks, and so I do want to try to keep myself muted. So a specific plan in SP is a type of zoning. It's a context-sensitive zoning that can be applied to property that allows for the planning department, the council member, the community to work with the developer in regards to the zoning on a property. So it is to some extent a choose your own adventure zoning, if you will. And so it starts as we look at what's in the zoning code, but we can be a bit creative. We can add additional buffers or give more flexibility as it relates to height, landscaping, those sorts of things within a specific plan. It's a tool that we've had for, gosh, since 2005, I think. And so there are a lot of SPs, some of them much more detailed than others. The St. Thomas SP allows for a certain number of residential units, certain square footage. it is the controlling zoning for that property. And so because the UDO is now voluntary, because there were triggers that were tied to the UDO, that if XYZ didn't happen, then the UDO became voluntary. And so it is not automatically applicable to properties now.
Okay. And but any SP that is being proposed has to meet the community plan. Is that correct?
So when planning is reviewing an SP, we review it against the land use plan, which is, as Anita said, the community character manual, which was established with Nashville Next. And so we would review any proposed SPs against the adopted community plan. So a lot of this area, like Anita said, is within a T5 regional center policy, which is anticipated to be some of the more intense areas that are within the county. And so we review, and they're going to give guidance on things like mass, bulk, height, all of those sorts of things, landscaping, building placement. And so we would review any proposed SPs against those existing land use policies.
Great, thank you. Anita, are you able to, did I accidentally cut off your slides, or is it a computer glitch?
No, the slide, I stopped sharing, right, because it kept locking up on me. Yeah, if you
Okay.
want me to go back to a map, I can.
Yeah, I think we might need to at in a few more questions. So let's hear, while we're finishing up the Hardingtown part, there was a question about what is going into Harding development. So the Hardingtown UDO, there's nothing, there's some set things, there's some not set things. So like Lisa just mentioned, the SP that is part of that Hardingtown area for St. Thomas that covers like the old oh gosh, why am I blanking on those tower names? The old apartment complex there and the old KC Club and some of that area, they're under the SP, and then the other ones, the other parcels around there are just straight commercial zoning. Okay, so looking at some of these questions, I'll come right back to. So one question was, what is this? So this part of Harding is in the Green Hills plan. Kind of, if you go up White Bridge Road and if you go further west, it's in the West Nashville plan. And is there a reason for that? Are there major differences between the two plans? Or is that just kind of how census lines were drawn at some point or something like that?
So our the county is broken into 14 community planning areas. Those are planning designated community planning areas. And so there are 14. I don't know if Anita has a map of those. She may. I see her scrolling around to look. There we go. So there are 14 community planning areas that you can see. West Nashville downtown, Green Hills Midtown. And so these are the areas, the planning areas that we have that we started using in around the 80s or so that we could, like Anita said, address specific areas. And so these are the adopted 14 community plans. Anita, do you want to add anything?
They were just using geography that they had at the time, like major things. And so it doesn't, there's no difference if you're in Green Hills versus West Nashville.
Okay, great. And so some questions have come up about that Belle Meade had evidently recently gone through their own kind of community planning process. And so there were questions about how the Belle Meade community plans play into this or apply to this property or this area.
So this area and this property would be covered by our adopted community plans.
Right. Sometimes, I'm not familiar with their recent planning process. Sometimes the city, I'll use Berry Hill as an example, we worked closely with them on aligning their land use policy with what's around them because both areas were growing and everything. We could do the same with Belle Meade. It's my understanding, most of Belle Meade's residential. and things. So yes, we can align, but yes, they would still govern their geographic area just as we govern our geographic area.
Okay. Thank you. And it is Imperial House. Thank you for putting that in the chat. I was thinking it was Imperial House, but I also recently watched Star Wars, and so I didn't want to make that kind of mistake there. Can y'all go over again what the Lisa, I think if Maggie starts barking, it's okay. She's not that loud. So could y'all just mention again what heights are allowed in this intersection? We have some buildings that have been there, like the Ingram building for a while. New buildings finishing up, but were approved for a while, being built, and just varying heights. So if y'all could touch on what heights are allowed. And of course, my dog just came in, so he might want to voice his opinion too.
Well, we're certainly pet friendly because I've got my puppy as well. So who knows? And some excited cats too that are letting me know I'm working late. So as far, from a land use policy standpoint, it sets some ranges that heights may be. Often our policies allow for taller heights if an applicant is meeting certain criteria as far as, contributing to various open space, transportation networks, things like that. So, let's start here with the suburban transect, that's a lot of the residential area. You often see like 3 stories in the residential area here. Evolving 3 to, suburban neighborhood evolving, once again, residential, but, you may have a different housing type. So it's usually 3, it could be up to, 4. So then you get into the urban community center. Heights can get a little taller, they can go 6. They can also get taller if some of that additional criteria is met. You jump from urban to regional center, as this brown color, and you can see like up to 15 stories with policy, but of course zoning is what's going to really tell you what you can do and how you can meet it. So some of those zoning districts, probably wouldn't allow for that. It also depends on the site size as well as to what you can get as far as height. Lisa, did you want to add anything? Lisa cannot unmute again.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
Yeah. So some of these are going to govern, like I said, a lot of that is function. You may have an MUL zoning district, but you've got a tiny site. So for instance, you may not be able to get a tall building with a height control plane.
Sorry about that. So like Anita just said, the height so the zoning districts are going to govern the height. And some zoning districts, for instance, an MULA has a max overall height. But when we're talking about a zoning district like the district that's on this property, which is MUL, or like district that is across the way that's zoned CS, where the Hill Center is, those zoning districts do not have an overall maximum height. They're controlled by what is called a height control plane. And what that means is that there's a height that's going to be set at a setback line. And the further that you move away from that height, the taller that a building could be. And so depending on the property configuration, how much square footage you put per floor, a building height could vary greatly. There is no absolute maximum height. It would just be a governing of the height control plane, the geometry of the site, and the square footage that's permitted.
So Lisa, I often kind of put that in my own terms as thinking about like a pyramid or like a stacked, like a wedding cake that has multiple layers. That's kind of the same as the controlled height plane, right?
It is, and that is one way to think about it, is like a wedding cake where you could have sort of tiers of height. You could also make the lower tiers much smaller so that then the upper tiers push up higher because they're further away, if that makes sense. And so, like I said, even on this height, we sort of showed one example of like what it potentially could look like, but there are a lot of different scenarios where you could end up with taller buildings if they're located more central to the site.
Okay. And there's some questions about flooding, which I know y'all aren't stormwater, and I'm going to be requesting stormwater to provide us some maps and potentially do another session with us, because a lot of these properties, and with just the increased storms we're getting, stormwater is more and more of an issue for us. But so pretty much everyone knows that this Kroger's flooded in the 2010 flood, and the liquor store did, and quite frequently the parking lot and some of the lower levels flood. Currently under metro regulations, I know y'all can speak broadly, but not super specific because you're not the stormwater department, but are buildings allowed to be built back in the floodplain? Can they build in the floodplain, or the 1,000-year, 500-year, 100-year? Can y'all give us a general answer on that?
Sure. So a property being within a floodplain does not mean that it is not allowed to be built on. It means that it would have to meet the standards of the stormwater department and the adopted stormwater regulations as it relates to construction within that floodplain. And so a 500-year floodplain is going to have less or fewer restrictions than a 100-year floodplain. Although they are all allowed to be built on, they just have to meet the standards that are adopted in the stormwater regulations. So when an SP is applied for any sort of preliminary SPs are reviewed by the stormwater department. So we are always getting their feedback whenever new applications are filed. If this was to develop under existing zoning and existing entitlements, stormwater would be involved as well.
Okay. Lisa, are you able to compare tonight what are some of the things that MUL zoning does not allow that the developers are asking in their proposal? Do you have that analysis, or is that something that the staff does that closer to the planning commission?
So there are likely uses that are proposed there are likely uses that are allowed by MUL that are actually restricted by the proposal. So MUL allows for, like I said, residential, commercial, retail, and then the proposal is also for a mixed use development with residential. Hotels are permitted in both. I don't have an exact breakdown of each, but I think that they're very similar. The MUL would permit short-term rentals, where the proposal would prohibit short-term rentals. So short-term rentals is permitted now, but would be restricted or are restricted in the proposed SP.
Okay. And so there's some questions that have come through about traffic and transportation. And so just wanted to let you know, NDOT, the Nashville Department of Transportation, which used to be Public Works, they are still going through the feedback that was given at the last community meeting at NBA, and having the traffic engineers do some additional counts and formulating, and NDOT is double and triple checking that. And so I don't have an update on traffic at this point, but hope to be able to announce when that will, happen. I'm speaking to the NDOT director and the director of planning on Thursday morning. And so I should hopefully have a date closer to that. But Lisa, I know when I was on the planning commission, traffic counts were part of the staff plan. Does staff take into consideration increases, decreases, or neutral traffic counts when making their recommendations?
Certainly. So we work, of course, hand in hand with NDOT in reviewing any SPs. And part of the analysis that goes into it is sort of what does the existing zoning what does the existing land use generate in regards to traffic? What does the existing zoning allow and what does it generate in regards to traffic? And then what does the proposal generate in regards to traffic? And so there are analysis that look at peak hour, but also total trips. So for instance, if you have a property that is all developed with a high square footage of retail and restaurant, and it shifts to residential with a smaller square footage of retail restaurant, then the trip generation is going to be different, and the generation by hour, peak hours are also going to be different. And so that's all part of our analysis.
Okay. And so I'm not sure if y'all are able to see, but I think some of y'all in the chat, in the question and answer chat area, if you will you can select who it goes to. If you will send those questions to me, I think some of them are going to Anita. If you'll send them to me, that would be great. That way I can keep tracking them along through. Lisa, one of the questions was, what is the setback along the rear of the property? So we know that there's the CSX railroad back there and Richland Creek. Do those impact the setback that is allowed by the MUL zoning?
So the current setback is 20 feet, and with MUL, and what you have seen on that property is actually there has been disturbance of the creek by the current development. And so that's what's there now. But the setback for the rear for MUL is not impacted by the creek or the rail. It's 20 feet.
Okay. Let's see here. Okay, there's some questions about what the developer is actually proposing. And tonight we're not going through their proposal. That will be gone through on the 15th. And some of y'all think that this was a traffic study meeting, and that definitely was not put out. We are still waiting for those traffic numbers and traffic counts to be calculated. And I actually even sent in a secondary request yesterday for an additional intersection to be looked at over the weekend. I sent that in. So it could be a minute before we get all of that back. So there's another question about tenants vacating the site. That's really up to the leases and the current leases. And whenever the current property owner transfers to the next property owner, whoever that may be, that's kind of in private contract area that Metro is not involved in those leases. I've had some questions come in about which developments are happening when, and why some developments, as I've got a lull in questions if y'all want to put more questions in there. I had some questions come in about why the Steinmart site was just dropped completely, whenever that was last year at some point, I believe. So we had a series of community meetings about that piece of property, the old Steinmart in Lions Head, and it really wasn't gaining traction or support from the community, and not necessarily taking feedback or making adjustments from the community. And the developer decided to withdraw the plan. So that was their decision. I don't control, the planning department doesn't control when these projects and proposals get filed or file their applications or go to the planning commission. Same with the also on White Bridge, the now Chewy's, the old O'Charlie's, that development, many of y'all saw that online. And I had been talking to them over the course of COVID and things, and just one huge giant block of building is what I don't think needs to go there, because it doesn't meet the community plan. It's not what I think a lot of you would like to see, and they weren't taking the feedback from the planning staff or myself. And so when they're not responsive before we go to the community, then I don't think they're going to be responsive once we get to the community. And so that is where that applicant also decided to withdraw the plan. So I've got some more questions coming in. Let's see here. Why is this area classified T5? it doesn't appear that this area would fit the definition and characteristics that y'all mentioned of T5. So I don't, that may be an Anita question.
Yes. That goes back to, it goes back pre-Nashville Next to several of the designations around where things were classified like regional centers and mixed use centers. And so some of those holdovers, like it was some of the malls, the old malls and things like that too. And so because of all the activity coming together, this was classified as a T5 regional center. It was carried forward in Nashville Next and everything. But those are things too that, we can always work more on over time if people do feel like, well, this isn't, what we want to see as far as the vision. It was just, we look at things like, what is the transit plan call for, multi-mobility, what are our main corridors, things like that. And so that's why you see the area of T5 there.
So Anita, would one of those things be that we have 2 state highways, although we don't necessarily think of them as state highways because they're just our normal roads coming through together here. But these are 2 larger roads, larger capacity roads, although traffic is terrible here because of the lighting system and things. But does those classification of the roads play into it?
Absolutely. And like I said, what opportunities are there for multi-mobility? In other words, really making that, pedestrian, bike, what circulation do you have? I realize that there are transportation problems and traffic problems today. I mean, we all certainly know that, but you've got, the St. Thomas property, the Harding Town Center, different things coming together that could generate some of those regional destinations as people talked about redevelopment happening and what could really be a center and a hub and a complete community.
Okay, thank you. So there's a question about providing details on the current plans for the Harding Town Center hotel and their building height. That's something that's in the SP that I don't know off the top of my head, and it has not been shared with with me, and that I know of, not with the departments, of if they're going to have a hotel and what their heights are, exactly how they're using their entitlements. There was a community meeting back in December that St. Thomas held, but and with Hill Realty, but no site plan was given and no details were given. So we are still waiting on that. So there are height restrictions on this parcel. They just have to be calculated out. There was a question about going back to the height restrictions. Policy makes recommendations, and then as Lisa explains, the rest is kind of calculated based on the math of the site and where is it going to go on the site. Is it in the front? Is it in the back? Is it in the middle? Okay, let's see here. I think there was another question about how did this become a T5, and I think we've answered that. Proposed here does not benefit the. Okay, so, what is the Harding Town Center? So the Harding Town Center is the Harding Town UDO. Anita, can you bebop back to that slide? So the Harding Town UDO, that urban design overlay, was negotiated and worked out at previous to me coming on to council. I'm blanking on the year at this point, and so that was put over those properties at that time and was basically kind of design guidelines. There was a transportation plan and things with it. And Lisa or Anita, do you remember when that was finalized?
I'm looking right now to see if if it says on the document here. Bear with me as my computer opens the document. 2005.
Okay, I was going to say 05, but I did not want to get that wrong. So that was 2005 that was put into place. Was there a recommendation in previous designs to keep this under 6 stories? I am not aware of any previous designs to keep the site under 6 stories. And yes, there was a question about how you can give feedback about the current proposal, and I'm going to put that website into the chat at the end. I'll share that link. Was there a transportation plan for the Harding development? Yes, there was. Part of the Hardingtown UDO did have a transportation plan, but now that the Hardingtown UDO is permissive, Lisa or Anita, how does that play into things? And can you, is that also kind of a permissive transportation plan? Or is that kind of something we need to talk to NDOT and the greater view of the overall Davidson County transportation plan?
I think we probably need to check in with NDOT about that, since so many factors have changed since then. Also, you know, NDOT's getting ready to kick off a countywide transportation study.
Right. Okay. So we'll save that for them. Let's see here. So yes, there is a question again. I don't want to get too much into traffic because I haven't gotten recommendations back, but NDOT and myself have asked the developments at the St. Thomas SP, what has not been developed along Harding in the Hardingtown UDO, where the Kroger's is going in the old Harris Teeter, the old movie theater, along with the Belle Meade Plaza. We have requested, and they are being required to pull all of those numbers together, and that's what NDOT is looking at holistically. And because the Manning is under construction, those traffic counts are included as well. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, there's more questions about the Hardingtown development. I will make sure that those, like I said, I'll include those links in an email. So there's a question about this being in the floodplain. Do y'all have a slide of showing how much of this is in the floodplain? If not, I can go to, I can take a screenshot later of that from Development Tracker.
No, council member, this green shows conservation policy, but as you get into the T5 and T6 transects, the land use policy, they don't show conservation policy because it's considering a built environment. Now, that being said, regulations still apply. That doesn't mean anybody gets out of stormwater regulations. It just means that the green does not show up on the policy map.
Okay.
For this
so I'll
transect.
ask stormwater for some of those maps because I can screenshot them, but they won't be as technical or as good looking as stormwater can show me. So I will put those together and share them out as well. Oh, a list of definitions. Yes, it has taken me 7 years and I still get lost in some of this lingo. And so I will work. I think I've got an old handout that we've put together. And I will ask the planning department to help put some of that together, as well as if we can share some of these slides out in my next email. So who is receiving feedback from the form that I've been using? I've been reading them, but then I've also been sharing feedback and concerns with the development team. Let's see here.
I'm not sure I understand.
Oh, sorry, that was my watch. Let's see here. So there was a question again about Steinmart and the Chewies. I did not squash those. Those are 2 plans that the developers pulled out of the process. I know there has been a lot of negative feedback on this Belle Meade Plaza proposal, but there has been some positive feedback as well. And we have only seen 1 iteration of this development, and they are committed to making changes and responding to feedback. And it does meet a lot of the pieces and parts of the community plan. And so we will have that meeting on the 15th to allow them the opportunity to present their next round. Okay, so is it possible to request a review of the T5 policy? And actually, Anita and I have talked about this before for the for the Lion's Head portion of White Bridge through there where it says T4CC. And I just actually wrote myself a post-it note to email you again, Anita. That's a site that we've discussed changing or to a different policy. What is the process of changing policies in the community plan manual?
Sure, council member. And we've been doing some analysis on that too, that we can set up a meeting and talk about the analysis for this part. You know, what you're looking at is, you know, why you think something warrants a change. And do you want, you know, what should it be? If it does change, what should it be? And what factors warrant that? So I think in this area, you know, you've got a lot of things going together in the sense of, trying to create a place that serves multi-mobility and everything as well. So that's why, you know, you saw on the Nashville Next concept plan, the corridors here. That's why you see, you know, this is a center, you know, a larger center area here in the red orange. Here are the multimodal corridors. So, you know, for instance, if your policy, if you were all this color, you know, if this was your concept map, you know, you wouldn't necessarily see multimodal corridors going up and down through areas. So a lot of it is too, like, what do you want to see? You know, do you want this to be like that kind of place that serves different things on a main corridor? And what do you want that vision to be? And oftentimes we're really drilling down to what the issues are. Sometimes it's not so much a function of land use policy as it is how it's implemented through zoning. So sometimes it's much more like you were saying, council member, about, hey, you know, we had some recent proposals up in this area, you know, in the T4CC, but we didn't like what they were doing. They weren't listening, you know, they weren't listening to what we were saying. So sometimes it's not the policy itself, but much more how someone is interpreting that as well. So just a lot of factors there, but we can talk about what options might be for the larger area.
Anita, can you go back to, and my pages aren't numbered of what you sent me. Could you go back to the growth and preservation concept map?
Yeah, I was just there. Yes. Right here.
Or maybe to the Transset map. Because what I wanted to point out is,
I don't have a zoomed in Transect one.
okay, maybe that was just on mine.
So here we go.
Yes. Okay. Yes, this is a little bit better. So when you look at this map, and as y'all know, when you drive further down Harding through Belle Meade towards Bellevue, there's not a lot of land in between the road and the railroad tracks, the land and the creek and things like that. So really this kind of where our intersection of Harding and White Bridge and Woodmont come together is kind of your last wide area to have shopping and residential and mixed use all together. And so I wanted to kind of point that out. That is one of the reasons why it does have a plan that allows for more mixed use, because if it's all a balancing act of where do we want these things? Where do we want to go shopping? Where do we want to have density? What roads are connecting them easily so we don't have development inside our, like the pink areas are more suburban neighborhood areas. So we don't have, you know, a shopping center in the middle of, I don't want to say nowhere because it's not nowhere, it's where we live, but a shopping center in the middle of West Meade or in the middle of Hillwood. We want them more on those corridors so people can get in and out and not be on our residential streets as much. So let's see here. I've got another question in the queue, but I lost my place. Okay. 1 second. Okay, so the question is again about, can Belle Meade Plaza redevelop without rezoning? Yes, it can. And we wouldn't have a say, the community would not have a say in how it is redeveloped outside of the existing stormwater regulations and base zoning. And so I think we have gone over what the difference between current zoning is and the request. And I'll ask for that a little bit more in a way that we can have it typed out and described, and I can share that. Let's see here. When will we get notice of the February 15th location and time? I am currently still working on that. Question about who makes up the development team. So a development team for any proposal is a variety of the purchaser or the owner. It could be their architecture team. It could be their engineer. It could be their PR team, so on and so forth. For the Belle Meade site, it is AJ Capital has put together a team, but they are the developers here. Why can't we interact directly with the developers and the whole community see the interactions? So tonight we don't have the developers on. This is really about the land use policy and community plans in the area, and then the ability to interact with the developers is at the community meeting. So we've had we had one of those at we've had two of those at MBA, and we'll have another one on the 15th. Let's see here. Can they build the current proposal under zoning? That's I'm not sure how much of their current proposal would be able to do that. There's a question about BZA being able to provide a special exception for the height. And so Anita, or I know Lisa's computer crashed. That's the problem with some of these PowerPoints is we have internet issues, but if one of
She's
you
back on, but she couldn't unmute herself.
Okay, I'll find her if you are able to answer
Okay.
why the BZA could not just grant more
no.
height rather than planning.
That one I do not know.
Okay, well, I shouldn't do this, but I will okay, Lisa, I think I've got you, and you might be a better answer than what I'm guessing is I know the BZA can grant special
Councilmember, I'm here now.
Okay, good. So the BZA can grant special exceptions for some structures. I know that doesn't apply for every structure. Does the BZA's ability to do that play in here or applicable here?
So there hasn't been any application to the BZA, but also special exceptions for height through the BZA are typically only for properties that are within the UZO. But like I said, the current zoning of MULA doesn't have an overall maximum height. It's just controlled by the height control plane. So the allowance for special exceptions for height through the BZA is typically for properties that are within the UZO.
Okay, so the regulations that govern the BZA's disposition of special exceptions is the urban zoning overlay.
Well, only for height. So a special exception by the Board of Zoning Appeals can be for some uses which require a special exception for a use permit, but there are also other standards that the BZA can grant special exceptions for properties that are within the UZO, including for height. Now, there could be a request for a variance to, and the planning department weighs in and gives recommendations on special exceptions, but you can ask for variances to height through the BZA. But again, the height in this case would be controlled. There's not a maximum height, but you could potentially ask for a variance to the height.
So that was definitely super in the weeds.
Sorry.
In lingo. No, that's fine. UZO, BZA, all of that. So the BZA is the Board of Zoning Appeals. The UZO is the Urban Zoning Overlay. And Anita, I'm not even going to ask you because I'm sure you don't have that map. The Urban Zoning Overlay started as, and maybe Lisa, why don't you describe the Urban Zoning Overlay so I don't butcher it and then you correct me?
Sure. The urban zoning overlay, when it was first established, was essentially the old Nashville city. So it was sort of the more compact urban areas of Nashville. think sort of Midtown, East Nashville, Germantown, outside of downtown, or downtown's in the urban zoning overlay also. And so it covers the nations, and actually the urban zoning overlay does cover like St. Thomas and parts of areas that are near here, but it doesn't make its way across White Bridge Pike. So it's
Okay.
near here.
But this site, but the Belle Meade, I'm sorry, you said parts of St. Thomas is under it, but not, but
Yes,
does it stop at White Bridge, Woodmont?
I don't think it even, so it's only partly on the north side of Harding Pike at that intersection, but then it also is partly on the south side, but not quite as much as close to Harding Pike, or sorry, to White Bridge Pike as it is on the north side. It's really hard to explain from a mapping standpoint, but St. Thomas, I believe, is within the UZO. And then I don't think it extends above the railroad track. I'm trying to pull up parcel viewers so I can explain it, but that is publicly available on our parcel viewer website.
I'm making a note to share the UZO boundaries.
It's not applicable to the Belle Meade Plaza site. I can say that with certainty.
Within the UZO, though, there is fewer parking restrictions.
So within the UZO, no parking is required?
Exactly. No parking is required.
Yeah.
Which is a recent change that the council made that I opposed. And then but the trade-off is there's some other good triggers, like in the UZO, you're more likely to get triggers that are going to provide sidewalks.
And Councilmember, I apologize. So St. Thomas is not in the UZO, but Aquinas College that's right next door to it is.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we are hitting about 7:17. If you have any other questions, please pop them in the chat. I did put in where I hope everyone is able to see the form that you are able to send me feedback on for the Belle Meade Plaza proposal that's currently before us. And then we will be getting, I will hopefully be getting confirmation on location and everything for the meeting on the 15th. And let's see here. Are there any T5 areas? I feel like I'm playing like trivia or stump the planner at this point, so I'm sorry. But are there any T5 areas on Hillsborough or Franklin Road?
Hold on just a second. I'm pulling up our mapping software. I don't have.
Lisa, do you know what maybe the Green Hills Mall? What is that a T5?
The Green Hills Mall is, yeah, the Green Hills Mall is, and probably that would be it. I mean, out this way.
So, right. So we've got the T5 center that's here at this intersection. And then if I'm looking around at other T5, hold on just a second. Trying to turn off some of my mapping layers and drive around on this little map. So, yeah, Green Hills Mall and that surrounding area is T5. It's a pretty broad area there that's covered by T5, going from Hobbs Road on both sides of Hillsborough Pike up to Crestmore. So that is all T5 regional center there. And then I don't know where downtown is T6. And then
okay, well, I think that the question was,
the further out I zoom, I lose my layers, and so I have to sort of just scroll around. But yes, Green Hills Mall is T5.
It's yeah, Midtown is T5. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And then I think our last question for the evening is going to be parcel viewer, and we've been talking about MUL, but some people have said MULA.
Yeah. I'm sorry. So this property is and Rivergate is also T5. on Gallatin Pike. So, and around Conference Drive. So that area is T5. So MUL Mixed Use Limited is what this property is zoned. We also have other iterations of Mixed Use Limited in our zoning code. We have Mixed Use Limited Alternative, which is a zoning district that has some urban standards. For instance, instead of having a set back line on the front, you have a build to line, which means buildings are sort of pulled up closer by requirement. So setbacks gives you a minimum that you have to be at least that far back. Build tos tell you have to be at least a certain distance close. MULA also has maximum height, overall height, where MUL does not have a maximum overall height because it's controlled by a height control plane. There are also standards in MULA for things like glazing, screening of parking garages, for liners at the street level. Those don't exist for MUL, which is what this property is zoned. So those are just a few of the big differences.
But this site that the current proposal is on is definitely MUL.
It's zoned MUL, yes.
Okay.
It is not and it's been zoned MUL since at least 1998.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you, Lisa and Anita. I appreciate y'all being on tonight. I appreciate all of my constituents and neighbors being on tonight. Again, I dropped that link into the chat where you can send me feedback to review. And like I've said, I have not taken a position on this proposal yet. I think that it has some good things in it, but it has a long way to get my commitment and my support and the community's. I think it's got a very long way to get the community's support. So at this point, I have not taken a position to support or oppose it because I want to see what plans what changes they're making in their plan, and see how the traffic study can come back and what NDOT is going to recommend. And I really want to make sure we have all of that information before we move forward. So again, thank you all for being on tonight. And as soon as this video is put up by the Nashville network or ITS system that puts it either on YouTube and things, I will get that link out along with some other links that we to plans and things that we discussed tonight. So thank you all for sticking around tonight and spending your evening with me and talking about land use and zoning. Thank you so much.